Okay, Dr. Hill Gemara. So before we start the Gemara, I just want to do a little bit of a chazara because I was very confused with the different shvuas and how you make the shvuas. So I want to go back to Daf Lamed Gimel, the Mishnah, that talks about how a shvuas edus is made. No, I'm sorry, it's not Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph, it's Lamed Chei Lamed Aleph. Let's go to Lamed Chei Lamed Aleph. The reason why I wanted to go to Lamed Gimel is because there's a Gemara that we need later today, and on Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, the Gemara discusses the halacha about Shavuos Apikadai, and no, I'm sorry, with Shavuos Eidus, and the Gemara tells us that Shavuos Eidus you only bring a carbon oil of for it if it's the gate to a davar shabamon. That's the only time you bring a carbon for Shavuos Eidus. And the Gemara brought several makayos for this. Rabbi Lazar was from the Oyin, Rabbi Kiva was also from the Oyin, the Rabbi Shaglili was, it's only for something that could be a good Eidus, either Riyah or Yediyah, but I want to focus in on Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon had two pshat. Rabbi Shimon first said that there's a memetzinu, there's chayiv kan v'chayiv v'pikad. We have called something called Shavuos Eidus. We have something called Shavuos HaPikadai. Mal'alon ein medaber ela b'tfiyas mammon. This, just like the Shavuos HaPikadai is obviously tfiyas mammon, so too the Shavua of Eidus is only by tfiyas mammon. And then Rabbi Shimon says, and there's also a kal v'chomer. What is a kal v'chomer? Madich pikadon, which is a very inclusive carbon. It's so easy to trigger such a carbon because noshim kan noshim, krivim kirachayim, sun kikshem, it's very easy. It seems to very liberally dispense the chiyuv of bringing for Shavuos HaPikadai. Yet there's one strict restriction. It's only negay by moment. So Shavuos Eidus, which is so restrictive, it doesn't apply to noshim, it doesn't apply to krivim, and it doesn't apply to psulim. Koshekein, it should only be nageya by mominus. So you don't have a right, because there's a way where Shavuos Eidus is more chomer than Shavuos HaPikadai. In what way is that? Shavuos Eidus, you're chayiv a carbon for sai for Maizid and sai for shogig, but by Shavuos HaPikadai there is only a chayiv carbon for shogig and not for Maizid. So what would be the halacha by a Maizid by Shavuos HaPikadai? Malchus, no carbon but Malchus. Rabbi Shimon holds that by Shavuos HaPikadai b'Maizid there's a chiyuv Malchus. That's all I want to highlight because that will be relevant later in the Gemara today. So now let's go to the Mishnah on Lamed Hey. The Mishnah tells us what is the Nusach HaShavua. And we know there's a whole discussion if you have to swear with Hashem or with a kinoi, and there's all these different ways to swear. But Kula Almanoid, it seems like there has to be either a shame or a kinoi. And where do we learn it from? The Gemara says we learn it either from Soita, which is actually today's sugya. So as we can say, the Lablina strikes again. We're also going to learn a little bit about Noza today, which will also be the Heintige Parsha. But what's interesting to note is we learned about Shvias Bitoy. By Shvias Bitoy, there was never a discussion. By Shavuos Ha'edus. By Shavuos Eidus is what we're discussing over here. But by Shavuos Bitoy, we didn't have a discussion of how you make it and what's the Nusach HaShavua. So because of that, there's actually a three-way Machlokes Rishonim by a Shavuos Bitoy. What if I just make a simple Shavua? I'm making a Shavua that I'm going to eat a banana today. Is that a Shavua? There's no Shem there. So there are those Shittas who hold that a Shavuos Bitoy doesn't need a Shem. Any Shavua without any Shem is going to be Chayiv. Then there's the Shitta who hold that if you make a Shavuos Bitoy without a Shem, it's not going to be Chayiv a carbon if you forgot about it and you were over. But there will be an Isser even though there is no Shem. And then there's the Shita who holds there's no Isser at all. There's no Isser at all if you don't make a Shvuah with Hashem. In other words, the halacha of Shvuah by Shavuos Bitoy is also governed by the same rules as Shavuos Eidus. So let's put that aside. So now we know what the situation is with Shavuos Bitoy. Now we have to look at Shavuos Eidus. So first of all, what exactly is the nusach of a Shavuos Eidus? That's something we have to explain. We also have to explain another big problem we have. we have this project called Shavuos Eidos, but the Torah never mentions one word anywhere about Shavuos Eidos. If you look it up in Vayikra Hey, when the pasuk introduces the project, not one word is mentioned anywhere whatsoever. Let's look at it. And the pasuk says as follows: Nefesh. No, it's not over here. It's before. Pasuk says Gitvach. It says v'nefesh ki sechta v'shama koil Allah who aid ayra ayada imlayag v'nas avoynai. Not one word is mentioned about any shua. So that's another thing we have to know. Where do we know b'chalal that you have a parsha of Shavuos Eidos? There's an Allah. Now the Mishnah says what an Allah is. The Mishnah on Allah is if you have Eidos for me and you don't say it, you should Yakacha Hashem, you should be punished. That it says in the Torah. But where does it say anything in the Torah that if you make a shvuah, I swear that I don't know Eidos, that there's any chiyuv korban? So that's the next thing we need to be master. Yeah, but it doesn't say he made a shvuah. It says he made a shvuah chalala. It doesn't say anywhere that if you make a shvuah. But it doesn't say anything about a shvuah. It says nothing about a shvuah. So how do you know b'chalal if you make a shvuah? We know if you make an Allah, it says Allah. If you make an Allah, if someone's mashbiah you with an Allah, you'll be chayiv a korban. But what if it's not a shvuah? Oh, so that's what we're going to discuss, right? How we know how Allah comes to shvuah. I know we learned it, but I want to chaz it over to bring it out clearly to make a tamtus of what we learned. So the first thing we need to know is what is a lashon of shvuah? Why a shvuah is chayiv? We'll get to in a minute. But what is a shvuah? What do you have to say? So I am being mashbiah you. So the Tevei is saying I am being mashbiah you if you don't know like this. Now there's more to it. So the Gemara discussed it a little bit, and the Gemara ended up saying, in the name of Abai said the following: Allah hadatani. Amar Abai hachigam. If you say mashbia ani aleichem b'shvuah, if I say, as the Tevei tells the Nitva, mashbia ani aleichem b'shvuah, I believe Abai is quoting word for word. This is what you say: mashbia ani aleichem b'shvuah. And then the Eid says, I don't know any Eidos, right? He doesn't have to say Amen. He says, I don't know any Eidos, and he did know Eidos, then he will have to bring a korban of the Yored. Or if he said, Mitzave ani aleichem b'shvuah. Or if he said, Oisrachem ani b'shvuah. Or if he said, Koivalchem ani b'shvuah. All of those would be the shvuah for which you're mechayiv and Eid, a korban of the Yored. The problem is, we know we learned it already on Amud Beis. We had a machlokes tanaim if you need to use mama shem avaya or kinui, but in the syntax that Abaya quotes, it has neither. So what's going on over here? So if you look at Rashi, the last Rashi on Daf Lamed Heba Beis says Oisrachem ani b'shvuah masker es Hashem be'echad mikol lashonis alolu. So you have to be masker Shem. So really, Abaya doesn't literally mean mashbiah ani aleichem b'shvuah. It means mashbiah ani aleichem Behavaya. Mitzavani aleichem behavaya. Oisrachem ani behavaya. Kavalchem ani behavaya. You don't really say shvuah.
Was mein Beschwer Amira betoy.
But you don't have to say the word b'shvu. You say havaya. So the Rashba says it's a little bit shverlich because if in fact it means Abai, like Rashi says. So why didn't Abai say so? Why did he go Baramiza? Zokt the Rashba. If you said Mashpia ani aleichem b'shvuah, you don't even need to say the Shem Avaya. Because if you said Mashpia ani aleichem b'shvuah, it's as if you said Mashpia ani aleichem b'shvuah ha'amur b'Torah. So you're referencing a shvuah of a shaitan Torah, which is with Shem Avaya. Because it said like Shishavu b'shmi la'shaker. So the shvuah in the Torah is b'shem. So if you say Mashpia ani aleichem b'shvuah and you mean shvuah ha'amur b'Torah, that's as if you said Shem Avaya. That's only if you use a lashon of mashpia. But if you use mitzaveh or shrachim mekavalchim, then you have to say the Shem Havaya or a kinoi, like our Mishnah holds. Now there's a the Bahag even says that if you say mashpia ni alechem, you don't even have to say b'shvuah, because versteht sich you mean a shvuah, and you mean a shvuah ha'amur b'Torah.
But that's why he says b'shvuah amur b'Torah.
You don't have to say b'shvuah amur b'Torah. According to the Rav, you say b'shvua, and according to the Bag, you don't even have to say b'shvua. It's verstetig that it's shvua hamur b'Torah. So that's the pashtus. The right mahalach is according to Rashi. You have to say ech b'chol Hashem shalom. It seems across the board. According to the Rashba, for why Abai didn't say that is because sometimes it's b'shvua, sometimes it's with the Shem, depending on exactly what your nusach is. The Rashba says the reason why Abai didn't say boom because he didn't want to mix in to the discussion on the base, which is whether or not you need
The question,
a kino, whether or not you need a Shem Havaya or a kino is good enough.
der zwei letzten, der Rashi geht darauf, I don't think on all of them. Hier steht also,
Rashi says, "Be'echad mikol halashonis halalu."
right, but if you can da, in the Torah is du alushin von Shlier, in the Torah is du alushin von Zavur, in the Torah is du alushin von Isser.
So,
Aber Koivalchem,
but the problem is, Rashi says you bask Hashem by Yasarchem. If Rashi only said by Kevalchem, I would be mighty to you. But Rashi says it's by Yasarchem. Okay, so that's number one. Now there's another thing. Allah, right? We mentioned earlier the pasuk doesn't say anything about Shua. The pasuk only says Allah. What is an Allah? So the Mishnah says so beferish what it is. Yaakov Hashem Elikim, if you don't say Eidos. V'chein Yaakov Elikim, Zuhi Allah Kshuv B'Torah. That is the Allah. So if you said Yaakov Hashem, if you don't say Eidos, that is the Allah, that's mamish before the Torah. There for sure, you bring a carbon out of the earth. Shavuot we know, but we don't know yet how we know. So let's turn on Talmud Beis, which will tell us how we know Shavuot, and that will also be quite enlightening as to whether or not you need to use Shem Hashem L'chal. Our Mishnah said any of the kinuyim will be a Shavuot. It doesn't have to be Shem Havaya. The Gemara challenged that on Daf Lamed Hey with Beis with a brisa that asked the following question: V'shama koil olam. In the parsha of Shavuos Eidos says V'shama koil olam. It never says anywhere Shavuot. So the question that we started with: how do you know that a Shavuot by a Eidos will be mechayiv with a carbon oil of Yored? Zokt the Gemara, zokt the Tana, zokt the brisa. It comes from Agzeres Shava. Nemer kan Allah v'nemer lahalana. It says Allah by V'shama Karloida by our sugya of Shavuos Eidos, and it says Allah in the sugya of Soita, again, Ha'antik apart. And we learn Agzeres Shava. Mal aldon Shvua afkan Shvua. Just like by Soita, it's a Shvua, because it says Beferish there in the Pasuk, V'shbi'a koinis ha'isha v'shvuas ha'Allah. So the Allah there is coming through a Shavua. So too, when it says Allah here, it also means a Shavua. That's and by Soita, it's B'dafka B'Shem Hashem, because the pasuk says Beferish V'shbi'a koinis ha'isha, and it says Yaakov Hashem Oischa with a lotion of Shem Havaya. So the Gemara asks, from these Tanoim, the whole Makor of Shavua is only from Soita through Agzer Shava, and by Soita the Allah is it has to be Shem Havaya. So how can you possibly say in our Mishnah that it's a Kinoi? That was the Gemara's question. Zok the Gemara, Abaye said, we have our Mishnah, Taki argues in that price, and our Mishnah does not learn it out of Agzer Shava, because if you're going to learn it out of Agzer Shava, you have to learn that you need Shem Havaya. So the question is, so if our Mishnah doesn't learn it with the Gzer Shava of Allah from Soita, how does Bechalal our Mishnah know? We're back to square one. How do you know that if you make a Shavua about Eidos, you'll be Chayv carbon over there? Where do you know that from? We don't have a Makar. Zokt Abaye, we know it from the following brisa. This is a little bit convoluted, this limud, so we're going to get it clear now. It says Allah. Allah, it says V'shama koil oila v'shvuos Eidos. Ein Allah ela loshen shvua. And the Allah means a loshen shvua. How do I know Allah means loshen shvua, which is the information that we're looking for? That's not a right that Allah itself is a loshen shvua, because by Soita it's a shvua with an Allah. You swear that you weren't metame, and if you were, you're going to have an Allah. But where do you know that if you swear by yourself, that's called an Allah? Because it says B'shama koil Allah by our sugya of Shavuos Eidos. So Zok Gemara, this is what it means to say. Hachi Gemara, Allah. Ainly Ella Allah. I would only know an Allah. An Allah, by definition, requires a shvuah with it. So now all we proved was that an Allah won't work unless it comes with a shvuah. So if you make a shvuah edus, I swear that I don't know edus, and I have an Allah, or you must be on me, you should swear that you don't know edus, and if you do know edus, you should have an Allah. That's what we know from shvuah's Allah. But how do we know a shvuah by itself? Zog to Gemara. Let's go on to Amud Aleph. Uminayin la'asois shvuah she'eini ma'ala k'shvuah she'eshi ma'ala. How do you know if you make a shvuah by itself? It's just like a shvuah with an Allah, meaning that's also what the Torah is referring to when it says v'shama koil Allah. This is what we've been looking for. Talmud loymar v'shama koil Allah. Koil is extra. From the extra word koil, could have said v'shama Allah. If there's only an Allah and a shvuah is nothing. But since it's koil Allah, v'shama Allah, v'shama koil, from that extra lashon of koil, we learn that a shvuah by itself, without Allah, is also going to be mechayiv you a carbon oil v'yoretz for shvuah seidus. Now, how do you know Allah by itself represents a shvuah? Allah shvuah, that you know from v'yava ita ba'Allah. So now we have everything we need to know. We know that when it says v'shama koil, it refers to either a shvuah by itself. It could also refer to a shvuah and an Allah together. And that also could refer to an Allah by itself. But now let me ask you a question. Do we know anywhere that there has to be a Shem? A shvuah, Allah, shvuah we know from the extra coil. So how b'chlal do you know that you even need to have any Shem? How do you even know that you need to have a kina even, after you don't need a Shem at all? So I don't know the answer to that question. But Klor, our Mishnah is not sure anymore. Our Tan holds that for a shvuah you need a kinui. Maybe misvara, in order to make it a shvuah, you need a kinui. But it's definitely not built into this limud that you need a kinui. All we have built into this limud is that a shvuah without Allah is good. What defines a shvuah we don't have anymore? A raya from here. So how they know that shvuah means at least a kinui, maybe that's min asvara. That's a Tana. But if you told me that there was a Tana who holds that plain shvuah without any shame at all would in fact be a good shvuah, I would understand it. And v'harai the Raj of Takalun halach al-maisa. If you say I swear mashpi'ani lachem b'shvuah, and according to the back even mashpi'ani lachem, that would be a good shvuah, and you didn't mention any shame at all. Okay, that's all I wanted to clarify. What the halach is by shvuas bitui, whether or not it needs to have Shem Hashem, and and how we know Shvuah, how do we know Allah, how do we know Shvuah and Allah, and the student of if it has to be Shem Havaya, that's if you learn it out of a Gzer Shava from Saita, or if you just learn it from the Yitir Psukim, and then you know Shvuah is a Shvuah, but you don't see anywhere but affairs that it has to include a Kinui, but our Tana is saying it needs a Kinui, at least that much. Okay, that's all I wanted to bring out, and now we can be mamshich into today's Gemara. Now the Mishnah of Lamed Zayin and Beis. I'm sorry, Daf Lamed Vav Amud Beis. Today's Daf Lamed Zayin. The Mishnah on Daf Lamed Vav Amud Beis goes through in detail the different options for a Shvuas Hapikadon. So I want to run through the Mishnah again, because there's some details that I think need to be brought out, and then we will continue with the Gemara. Zokt the Heilige Mishnah. I'm going to rush through it because most of it is very straightforward. I'm going to pause and explain in greater detail the nekudas that require an explanation. Shavuos hapikadon noheges ba'anoshim u'v'noshim b'rechokim u'v'kroivim b'ksherim u'v'psulim. Any person who claims someone else owes money, it doesn't matter who they are. It's not mugval like shavuos eiduses. B'fnei bezin v'shaloi b'fnei bezin. Now mipi atzamay u'mipi acherim. So mipi atzamay and mipi acherim einoi chayiv ad sheyich perenu b'vezdin. If it's mipiatma, no restrictions. Any shvuah mipiatma, you mechayiv shvuas apikadon. But if it's mipiacherim, if somebody was mashpia you, I'm mashpia you that you have my watch, then you'll only be chayiv if you were koifer in bezin. If you have meir, b'chachamim moimrim, bein mipiatma, bein mipiacherim, even shekaver by even non bezin chayiv. So I want to stop here for a second to understand this machlokes. Now, first of all, a shvuas apikadon means someone mons me and says, "You have my pikadon, you have my money." Or you have money that I lent you. That's a sumasyat. Or you have money that you stole from me. So any of these things I deny with a shvuah, and then on Moida, I have to pay Karen, V'choimish, and I have to bring a carbon asham that's worth at least 2 shkolim. So we have a shaila over here. If I was mushba mi piacherim, do I have to be kofer in Bezdin or even not in Bezdin? Then we all remember that by Shavuos Ha'edus, we learned that it has to be a davar shabamammon, right? How did Reb Shimon learn it? Reb Shimon learned it from Shavuos HaPikadon. Just like Shavuos HaPikadon is a davar shabamammon, so too Shavuos is a davar shabamammon. But guess what? There is something that Shavuos HaPikadon. Oh, another thing. How do we know that Shavuos Ha'edus? How do we know that Shavuos Ha'edus? You could even make a shval piatzmai. The pasuk says v'shama kailola v'u'edei ra. It's shama. It's only the Torah is only speaking about a case of mashpia mushba yidei. How do you know that there's a chiyuv carbon for Shavuos Ha'edus if you made your own shvuah? You know what the makar is? The makar is Shavuos HaPikadon, because Shavuos HaPikadon is dafka speaking where you swore on your own, as the pasuk says. He denied. He made his own shvuah. The kichesh ba, the nishbal sheker. He swore by himself. So we learn just like by Shavuos HaPikadon. Just like what the Gemara touches that the pasuk. I'm not going to argue about that now. But I'll call upon him. It's clear that the only way we know that a shvuah al piatzmai is mechayiv you a carbon shvuah by Shavuos Ha'edus is only because we learned from Shavuos HaPikadon. Oy bezoi zoma ken learn pink v'kedochet. Just like by Shavuos Ha'edus, mushba mipiacherim is mechayiv, who had in Shavuos HaPikadon mushba mipiacherim, and that's why our Mishnah says umipiacherim. But remember, we had a machloikis of doin mina mina or doin mina v'ukbi asra, and that is whenever we're importing a halacha. So here, Shavuos HaPikadon is importing the halacha of mushba mipiacherim. Where is it importing this halacha from? It's importing this halacha from Shavuos Ha'edus. So the question is, this imported halacha of mushba mipiacherim, does it follow the rules and the conditions that are found in Shavuos Ha'edus, and that is you need a kfir and bezdin? So that's doin mino mina. When you import halacha, you take it with all of its restrictions. That's what Reb Meir holds. Reb Meir do piacherim ein chayv ad sheyich perenim bebest. If Reb Meir, but the Chacham say no. When you import halacha, you just take the halacha by itself. The conditions, you apply the conditions of the local environment that you're putting this halacha. So Shavuos HaPikadon is importing mushba mipeacherim, but the halachas of Shavuos HaPikadon don't require a kfir bebest. Therefore, v'cham oimrim bei mipiatzma bei mipeacherim. Kiven shekafar boy chayiv. Okay, next. The chayiv al zod nashvua. If you're totally bemazed, you know you're not allowed to swear false, you know you're going to have to bring a carbon if you swear false, and you know that you have the pikadon by you, it's all mazed, you're still chayiv a carbon shvua chaymish and asha. V'ashigagasa im zod na pikadon. What if you didn't know that there's a chayiv carbon for making this false shvua, but you knew that you're swearing false? For that you'll also be chayiv the chaymish v'asha. But you know when you're not chayiv at all, which we teach is where you forgot you had to pick up. That's called an oinus. That there's no chiv at all. Umachayiv also doina for a mazid you're chayiv asham bekesav shkolim. Zok the Mishnah weiter. Shavuos HaPikadon keita. Amarloi tainli pikdoni sheichli biyatcha. Now the Gemara is going to discuss when do we look at it like it's multiple shvuos versus an individual shvuah. So tainli pikdoni sheichli biyatcha. Shavua shein lech biyadi aisha amar loy ein lech biyadi mashpiachani. V'amar mein. So that's one general shvua. Harei zechayiv, he'll be chayiv one shvua. But what if hishbial of chamesh pamim? What if 5 different times you approach this fellow, and each time you hope that he would give it to you, and he would admit, and each time he denied it? Ben b'fnei bezdin uvein shaloi b'fnei bezdin the chafar, and he denied chayiv al cholachas v'achas, and of course, if you're mashpia mipiachem, according to Reb Meir, there has to be a kfir and bezdin. Why would there be multiple chiyuvim for multiple shvuos? Very simple. Because every single time I approached this fellow, he could have been murdered, and he was nachamol kofer, nachamol geleikent mita shvuah. That's why he's chayiv each time. Okay. Now we're going to look at one shvuah that could be multiple shvuos. What happened was there was an object, a car, belonged to 5 shuvim, and he was watching it, and they all were money for it, and he was denying that he had it. Amruloi, they told him as a group, Tain London Pikadin Sheishalom B'Yadcha, and he made a general shvuah to all of them, Shavuah She'ein Lachem B'Yadi, Ein Lachem B'Lachas. Or Shavuah, or what if he broke down the shvuahs? What if he said to each person, Shavuah She'ein Lach B'Yadi, V'loi Lach, V'loi Lach. So that we look at it like it's multiple shvuahs, Chayav Al Kol Achas Vachas. You don't look at it like it's a multiple shvuahs unless Achiyem Shvuah B'Achroin. So you have to Shavuah Lach, V'lailoch, shvuah. He repeats the word shvuah again. So all of the lailochs are surrounded by two shvuahs. That would be an individual shvuah. Rabbi Shimon said, no, it's only an individual shvuah. If it's a full shvuah, okay, that's multiple people. What if I'm loaning you multiple things that you have of one? Tenli pikadoi, which is a pikadon. So sumishar is a loan, gezel, or a veda. So I'm asking for four things because you have four things of mine. And how do you respond? Shavuah she'enach b'yadi. I have nothing of yours. One shavuah. But what if I broke the shavuah down by item? Shavuah she'enach b'yadi pekadoin u'sasumas yad vegezel v'aveda chayav al kolachas v'achas. This is when it's different types. What if they're all a pekadon but different pekadoinis? Ten lechitin u'sa'ari v'kosmin she'ei shli b'yadcha. Shavuah she'enach b'yadi there ain't chayav al achas. But shavuah she'enach b'yadi chitin u'sa'ari v'kosmin there it's chayav al kolachas v'achas. Now Reb Meir says an interesting halacha. Even if you didn't use a lashon rabban like chitin and soirin, use a single lashon. Afilu amachita usoir v'kusmis still chayav b'kolachas v'achas. We're going to have to wait for the Gemara to understand the chiddush of Reb Meir. Next, now the Mishnah is getting into the halacha that you're only chayiv for lakening a pikadon, for lakening moment that you owe if it's mominus. But if it's a knas, where if you would be moida, you would be potter anyway. Because moida b'knas potter, of course, there's no chiyuv of a carbon shavuos apikadon there, which is nasham gezelos. What was the case? Anasto b'ti says biti. Now, when someone's ma'anis somebody, he has to pay a knas. Now you would answer, why is it chayiv? It's a knas. Rabbi Shimon Taka says, poiter, shein mishalom knas al piyatzmai. I told him, whenever there's a knas, there's also nezek that comes along with it. So the shvuah is taka not for the knas part. The shvuah would be because he lakened up the boishes of pagam, which is mammon. Another example, the nafta shayri, that's clearly mammon. What about ganavti? Now he's only denying the knas of dal vei for tvicha mechira. Potter, because that's knas. What about if someone said, "Hey, Shari, your ox killed my ox, nezek." Again, it's a regular case of mammon. What about Hey, Misharchas Abdi? When your shar kills my Evid, that's a knas. You pay me shloish mishkolim no matter how much the Evid is worth. That's a case of knas. You were chayvel me, you hurt me. There's a chiv mammon. What about a person's evet told his other, you knocked out my tooth, or you blinded my eye, which gives you a knas that you have to free me. And potter, because that's knas. Now, I think this was such an exhaustive list of every moment and every knas, I don't know what could be missing. Yet the Mishnah saw the need to make a klal. The Gemara is going to know what is missing that the Mishnah had to make this klal. Beautiful. Now the Gemara tells us a very interesting story. Rabacha bar Huna, Rab Shmuel bar Rabba, bar Chana, Rab Yitzchak bar Rabbi Yehuda. Three titans of Torah, three Gavaldik Talmidim. They learned in the best yeshiva. Everyone wanted them for Shaduchim because they were the best of Bachim in the best yeshiva. Who did they learn by? Tani Shavuos Bei Rabba. They learned the Masech of Shavuos by the Rashiva, by the Heilige Rabba. So Paga B'u Rav Kana. Rav Kana met them and he figured if you learned Shavuos by Rabba, we can ask you anything and you should know it because you learned it by Rabba. And he asked him the following fascinating question. Amar Rav Kana asked him the following question. Amalu, he told him, what would be the halacha if Hazid b'Shavuos HaPikadon? So we know if you, the Mishnah is beferish, if you were b'Maizid, if you've been Maizid, swore falsly, you're being a carbon. But that's because they might not have been Hasra. But what if there were Adim and the Eidim warned him, hey, uncle, if you swear falsely, you're going to get malchus. Would you get malchus? What are the Gemara says? There's three tztadim. There's three possibilities of what the psak halacha could be. On the one hand, Kivan the Chiddushu, the whole concept of Hasham Gzelos is a Chiddush. Because you are knowingly swearing false. You're doing a very Maizid. There's no place in the world, which Rashi and Tosfos is lavdafke, but generally there is no Isser that if you're over b'mezid, you will be zoicha to the kapara of a carbon. If you eat chaylev b'mezid, but there are no edim, you're not over the carbon. So do you say even the chiddushu? Since the whole concept of Hashem Gezelos is a chiddush, the bechol atar le'atshchan midi the ma'isi carbon, mezid the ma'isi carbon, v'acha ma'isi carbon. Therefore, maybe loishna asrubei, where you could give malchus, loishna asrubei, there would be no malchus. You only bring a carbon because that is the chiddush of Hashem Gezelos. Or on the other hand, maybe hanami lehechad lo yasrubei. Where does the Torah say you bring a carbon? That's where we can't give you malchus, even though it was mezid because there was no asra. But if we were able to, the Edom warned him, don't swear falsely. Maybe milk halaki carbon lemais. Maybe you would get malchus and they wouldn't bring a carbon. Or the third side is maybe he has to get malchus and he brings a carbon. That's the shayla. So these three Talmid Chachamim told Rav Kana Amr Lei Tanina. We actually have a brisa that will be placed at your shayla. What does it say? There's a brisa that says Chamura Heimenu Shvus Abikot. Shvuas HaBikadon is even more chomer than Shvuas HaEdus. Why? Shechayovin al Zadoina Makli. Shvuas HaBikadon, you're chayiv makas b'mezid. Now I want to remind you, the very first thing I started today with was that Reb Shimon, who said, Ma l'pikadon, that the Torah didn't make shogeg k'mezid, but by Shvuas HaEdus, the Torah made shogeg k'mezid. So this is what it's saying over here. We're talking about Shavuos HaBikadon, and we're saying Shavuos HaBikadon is more chomer than Shavuos HaEdus because by Shavuos HaBikadon chayovin al zayin makos. V'ashigagasa osham v'kesef shkolim, an osham that costs you 2 shkolim. Now, midikamerlei al zayin makos. The Brisa says al zayin makos. It's mashma mechlal the atribay. It must be the case was where Adam warned him because you wouldn't give malchus without a hasra. Yet, what does the Brisa say? The Ka'amar Makais in carbon light. You only get malchus and not a carbon. B'shagig, you bring a carbon. B'mezid, you get malchus. So you have a raya to Rav Kahana Shaila that if you're master him lemalchus b'mezid, he gets malchus and no carbon. Umay chumra. Why is it a chumra? Why is it a bigger chumra to get malchus versus a carbon oil of a that the Shavuos HaEdus will get? So tomorrow, very simple. The ma'isi carbon lucky. If a person has a choice between getting malchus or bringing the carbon, he would much rather bring the carbon. So that was the raya that they wanted to bring. So now a new Talmid Chacham stuck his nose into the shayla.
Is to put a big woman. Is to put a big. That's what's fine against. Yeah.
So we're going to have to say in a different area that could be this. They hold for carrot. That's the places. And Amalu Rabba Bar Isi. Rabba Bar Isi says you don't have a good raya from here. You know why? Because who is the Tana of this brisa? It has to be Reb Shimon. Man Tana Zodoin Shavuos HaBikadon Loinitin L'Chapora through a carbon. Rather you get malchus. It's Reb Shimon. The Reb Shimon that we learned at the beginning of this year. Right? No, Avol Rabbanon, but maybe according to the Rabbanon who are going to Shimon, carbon nami maisi. Maybe he would bring Saya carbon, and Saya would get malchus. He would bring a carbon, and he would get malchus. So Mamela, you don't have a raya to our shayla because maybe you bring a carbon and malchus. Now, you bring a carbon and malchus, or you only get malchus. At least it narrows it down to either carbon and malchus or malchus only, but it's for sure not carbon only. So we at least got some clarity. But Amalu Rav Kahana said, your whole brisa is it's a mistake. You have the wrong gears of a brisa. You don't know what you're talking about. Because you know who introduced this brisa to the Besmedish? Me. And that's not what I said. My words were mixed up and distorted. Let me tell you what the brisa really said. Amalu Rav Kahana, bar mi no dahi. You can't bring me right from that brisa. I was the one who quoted it, and I quoted a completely different brisa. And this is what I said. Echad Zedaina, Ve'echad Shigagasa, Osham, Bekesef Shkolim. So there's no Malchus anywhere. There's no Malchus anywhere by Shavuos HaPikadon. So you got me totally wrong. There's no Malchus. If you always bring a carbon, so why is this more chomer than the carbon oil of Yered? Dr. Mar, very simple. My chomer, diluhasam chatas. The carbon oil of Yered, even if you're an usher, you bring a chatas. A chatas you can buy for very cheap, bas danka. You can buy it for a very small amount of money. But the hacha, by the Shavuos HaPikadon, where you have to bring an asham, the Torah dictates the minimum that it has to cost. The hacha asham b'kesef shkolim. So that's the chomer. Okay, I'm sorry.
The andere carbon is the
That's right. Zot Gemara, but l'maytzav ligma mina. You still have a rye from here. That you have a rye from here that you bring a carbon. You have a rye from here that you bring a carbon. By Maizid you bring a carbon. So oy bezoi, even according to Rav Kahana's version, Rav Kahana has a pshitis to a shaila. So Gemara, no. Dilma de lo yasher bey. Maybe the Bryce is lo yasher bey. We don't know if it's asher bey or lo yasher bey. Could be it's asher bey, and then you have a rye. But could be it's lo yasher bey, you don't have a rye at all. So maybe you don't have a rye at all. So we're back to the same shaila that Rav Kahana wanted to know. What would be the halacha asher bey lemalchus by a Maizid? Does he get malchus? Does he bring a carbon, or does he do both? Tashma. Ein chayavin al shigagasa. This is our Mishnah already. Ein chayavin al shigagasa. Ma hein chayavin al zdoina. Our Mishnah asks, what are you mechuyev for a Maizid of Shavuos HaPikadon? Asham b'kesef shkolim. My love, when it says zdoina Maizid, Pashas, what does Maizid mean? A real Maizid. Edom and Asra. My love with the Asher. So I have a raya that if it's with the Asher, you bring a carbon and you don't get malchus. Zok Gemara, no. Hachanami, the loy Asher. Maybe it's being the loy Asher, so you don't really have a raya. Tashma. Now this next brisa that we're about to quote, Rashi says, I don't know what it was relevant to, because it's just a little excerpt from a brisa that's comparing Nazir being more chomer than Shavuos HaPikadon. Lagabi, what this brisa is discussing, we don't necessarily know, but that's not relevant. We can still bring a riot. Lo yimamrit b'Nazir, Nazir is more chomer. You know why? A Nazir who's matam himself. Matam himself gets malchus. Toimer b'Shavuos HaPikadon, under the same circumstances, b'Maizid, she'ena like it wouldn't get malchus. So let's see, what was the case over here? We're saying that a Nazir would be like it. Of course, that's what we call the Lubina strikes again. We learned about Nazir today. Mechlal the Atrabe. It must be that he was warned. Vika Omar. Yet we're comparing under the same circumstances a case of the Atrabe. Toimar b'Shavuos HaPikadon she'ena like it. Aval carbon maisi. So you have a kloraya that by Shavuos HaPikadon, if it was made with a straw, there's no malchus, and you bring a carbon. Beautiful raya. Zokim, you don't have a raya. My ain't like it. Then you nifta b'malchus. Ain't like it means you can't get away with malchus. Mechlal the nazir tamei nifter b'malchus. But let's stop a second. So maybe all it means is that any nifta b'malchus, rather you need both malchus and you get malchus and you get a carbon. So there's two possible ways to learn this. Either it means you don't get malchus, you get only a carbon, or it means you don't only get malchus, you get malchus and a carbon. But it's for sure not that you get only malchus. So out of the three tzaddim that Rav Kahana cleared, it for sure can't be only malchus. It's either a carbon only or it's malchus with a carbon. So we have a mix of pshitas. Zok Gemara, as an aside, let's go off on a tangent. You're telling me that you don't bring a carbon for a nazir tameh, but we know that a nazir that becomes tameh brings a carbon. A carbon ksiv bei hasam. So tomorrow you're right. A carbon ksiv bei. So tomorrow you're right. It's a carbon, but it's not a carbon to be mechaper on the chet. Hasam the maisi carbon keheiche the teicho alei the ziris b'tayra. The whole carbon is just to reset the clock on his naziris, but it's not for his avera. For his avera, malchus by itself patters you, mechaper you, but by the Shavuos Eidos, you might need malchus and carbon or only carbon, but definitely not malchus by itself. Gebalting. So at the end of the day, we haven't been poishit Rav Kahana Shaila. We have a partial pshitas, but we still don't have a pshitas for a shayla. So you know what they did? They went to their rabbi. Amru Rabban and Kamai the rabbi. They went back to Rabbi. They said, Rav Kana asked us the shayla, and we don't seem to be able to find a right either way. Amru Rabbi said, your whole shayla is konshayla. There's no basis for the whole shayla. Never mind that if they punch it, it's not a shayla. Why is it not a shayla? Because you're misunderstanding the whole situation. Michlal the chilu asher beviked. Your whole shayla if there's edim and asra. It means if there's edim without asra, you don't have a shayla. Then you're sure you bring a carbon. Your whole shayla is edim with asra. What happens? But edim without asra, you bring a carbon. But that's not true. Michlal the chilu asher beviked edim mechayiv. Why would you be chayiv? If there's edim that says, imagine I come to Bezin, edim say I have his pekadon. I'm holding on to his Rolex. And I make a shvu, I'm not holding on to his Rolex. Is that a shvu that I would bring a carbon for? That's a shvu shov. It's not a shvu's pekadon. Because shvu's pekadon means I'm denying with my shvua that I owe money. In other words, my shvu is accomplishing that I'm not going to have to pay. But when there's edim contradicting you right there together with you, your shvu is not a useless shvu. So Zok Rabba, you wouldn't even bring a carbon for that. There's no carbon at all. When there's edim, there's no carbon at all. So you're all trying to yell carbon, this carbon, there's for sure no carbon. Even if there's no asra, there's no carbon. Now, from Rava's comments, it's quite clear that Rava holds Alma Kasova Rabba, HaKoifer b'momen, Sheyesh Edim Potter. You see clearly that if someone's koifer on moment and he makes a shvuah and there's edim, he doesn't bring the carbon chaimish v'asham. You know why? Because there's hastus can shvuah. It's not a shvuah because it hasn't accomplished anything. You're still going to have to pay. Amalei Rav Chanina l'Rabba, Zok Rav Chanina to Rabbi, such a beautiful chiddush. Tanya the Messiah. I'm going to bring a raya that a wasted shvuah doesn't mechayiv you a carbon shvuah, because it says by the shvuah savikon the kicheshba, and the Brisa tells us prat leboida laechad min ha'achen or laechad min ha'shoftim. So two brothers are money me, two shoftim are money me, and they're moided to one another, denied to the other. The Gemara is going to drill down to get clarity in exactly what that case is. But let's look at the next case, which is relevant to our discussion. V'nishbal sheker, prat l'loive b'shtar, l'loive beidim. If you borrow money with a shtar and I deny it, that's also kviris tvarim ba'alma because you have a shtar. Same thing if you have edim. So that's mamish what Rabbi said. Amar lei. So Rabbi says, I'm very flattered that you want to bring a riot, but your riot is not a good riot. You know why? Because the case of this brisa is not where I deny that I owe you any money, which would be a right to me. You know what the case is? Now we're talking about a Meshuggah and why he would do this, but the case was Lavisi. He's moited that he borrowed money. You come and you say, I have edim that you lent me money, that I lent you money, or I have a shtar that I lent you money, and I say, I'm moited I owe you money. But v'loy Lavisi v'edim, or Lavisi v'lo Lavisi b'shtar. I'm moited that I owe you money. I'm just swearing that there was no shtar, which is a false shvuah. I'm swearing there was no edim. There is what the pasuk is telling us, that there's no korban shvuah because you didn't deny money. That everybody agrees to because you didn't deny money. But in my case, where I denied money but it didn't help, there you don't have a raya from this brisa that it wouldn't be a good shvuah. Now mimai, how do I know that that's prat? Because this is a little bit of a modna shot. Velachem Meshugana would swear that way, but I have a raya that has to be shot in the case of the brisa that says prat l'loive b'shtar l'loive beit. How do I know this? The katana v'kichesh prat l'moida l'echad min ha'achen l'echad min ha'shoftim. That was the first case. Now we're going to delve into the details of the first case. Hai l'echad min ha'achen hechadam. What exactly was the case? Ilayim the oidlei b'palga didei. So basically, Yankel and Beryl, two brothers, come to me and say, you owe us $100. And I say, Yankel, I owe you 50, Beryl, I owe you nothing. Right? If that's the case, so ha'ika kfir didach. Forget that I'm owed to Yankel. It's a regular kfir of Beryl that I swore about that should bring a carbon. That can't be the case. Elav, the case was the Omer lay mitarvin yaspis. Yankel and Beryl come to me and said, you borrowed the $100 from both of us. Well, Amalun, I respond, I borrowed $100, but not from Beryl, only from Yankel. And I swore about that. That's mamish a wasted shvuah because I'm paying anyway. And not only that, they're going to share the money anyway, right? To have a like first varim ba'alma. So the reisha first varim, if that's the case of the reisha, it makes sense to say seifenamik first varim was a case where I'm moed I owe you the money. I just swear that there's no shtar. So you don't have a riot to Rab. Now the Gemara is going to turn around and ask a whole bunch of kashas on Rabbah, and Rabbah will not survive this barrage of kashas. Zok the Heilige Gemara Tashema. Einoi chayiv al shigugasa. Our Mishnah. Umau chayiv al zadoina asham b'kesef shkolim. So zadoina you're chayiv and asham b'kesef shkolim. My love, Zodon Edom. What do you mean Zodon? Zodon means there's Edom that are here that know you're lying, and you still bring a carbon, so you see not like Rabbah. Zodon means you knew on your own and you were made on your own, but they were never Edom. They don't have a right from there. Tashma, we're going to go through all the same brachos that we brought before, and we're going to use them for Rabbah. Tashma, how you stay kidei Edom. There were two kidei Edom. We learned this Mishnah by Shavuos Edom maybe 2-3 days ago. How you stay kidei Edom. Kafra harishayna. The first set of Edom denied that they knew anything. The acha kafra shnia. So the halacha is shten chayavis. They both chayiv the carbon Shavuos Edom because each set of Edom were independent of the other. If they sheyachayla Edom l'skayim b'shtei. I understand what a second set of Edom are going to be chayiv when they swear that they didn't know Edus. Because with them, I could have moaned the money, and without them, I can't moan the money. The hakafra law kat rishoina, because there's no backstop to them. Because the kat rishoina was already kafir. So now it's only them. So by them swearing that we don't know Edus, they're actually impacting the Teveya. El rishoina, the first set of Edom, why would they be chayiv for denying the no Edus? There's a backup anyway. There's a second set of Edom. So their shvuah has zero impact because it still allows the Tevei Timun using the testimony of the second set of Edom, Akai Mishniya. We had this kasha, and if you remember, the Gemara quoted Ravina. Amar Ravina, Ha'abamayiskinan, Kigoin Joisha Shniya, B'shas Kviris Rishayna, Kroivim B'nishayseim. At the time where the first set of Edom denied that they knew it, there was no backstop. Because at that point, the second set of Edom were psulim. You know why? Because they were brothers-in-law. They had married sisters. You're going to ask me, so what's the chiddush? They're pasal Edom. The teretz is because at that moment their wives were going to be dying very soon. So although right now they're pasal b'sharu sham, in a minute they were going to become kosher. So and therefore we say that there's a backstop. There's another set of Edom, so the first set of Edom shouldn't be chayiv. Rather, they're alive. Right now, the second set of Edom are apostle, and therefore the first set of Edom will be mechuyev. A carbon shvuah. Tashma. Let's try another right. Umamish, we're bombarding Rabbah. Bal habayis shatan tainas ganav epikot. The halacha is if I'm a shomer chinam, and the Baalim come to me and they claim that I owe them my pikotin, and I tell them I don't have it because it was stolen from me, and I'm potter on Geneva Vaveda. And I made a shvuah that it was stolen from me. V'nishba. And then then I was moida, you know what? I really have your object, and the whole thing that it was nignav, I made up, I fabricated, and I swore falsely to that effect. Ubo Edom, and Edom came. If I was moida before Edom came, so I'm not chayiv kefil, because you're not chayiv kefil if you're moida b'knas. Well, I still have to pay nasham gzelos. Mishalom keren v'chay mishvasha. But if I was only moida once Edom came already, meaning they were Edom that knew I was lying all along. Mishalom tushlim kefel v'asham. There I pay a kefel and I bring a nasham. So the kasha is my shvuah was never a shvuah. They were Edom that knew that I'm lying. So my shvuah was never going to be part of me. So why am I chayiv kefel v'asham or keren chamish v'asham? So tomorrow, we can go with the same thing as Ravina, meaning maybe at the time that I swore, the Edom that saw were in fact brothers-in-law, so they were apostle Edis. But later on they came when they became partial Edis. So you might ask me, Kiveger, you might ask me if we were apostle b'shas ma'isa when I swore, when I did my avla, so they're apostle Edom, right? If Edom are apostle when they witness an event and they become kosher later, they can't say Edom. Dr. Kiveger, they didn't have to see the event. They're being made, and right now I know for a fact that because is in your rishus. Now we're kosher. Okay. Amalei Ravina Ravashi. Ravina told Rashi, let's have another kasher on Rabbah. Tashma. Chamura mimenu Shavuos HaPikadon. We said Shavuos HaPikadon is more chamer than Shavuos Eidos. Why? Because by Shavuos HaPikadon, shechayovin al sedoina makos, val shigagasa osham bakesef shkolim. Now, midikamer loika, since it says loika, there must have been asra here. Mechlal dikedim. Ka'amar al shigagasa osham bakesef shkolim. If you did it b'shogig, but they were Eidim, you're going to be chayiv a carbon. How can you be chayiv a carbon? Your denial, your shvuah was never valid because there were always Eidim that were ready to testify that you have the pikadon. So Amalu Rav Mordechai Barbi Nadahi. You can't bring it right from the Brisa. On Amar Aleph, we already said that that's not what the Brisa said. It's a mistake. The Amalu Rav Kana Anot Haninala Vachitanila Echad Zedoina Ve'echad Shikagasa Osham Bekesav Shkolim. So it's not speaking with Eidim. Maybe there were no Eidim at all. Toshma. And this is going to be the final upslug to Rabbah. Toshma. Loi im Amar Benazir Tamei Shekain Loika. Timer b'shvus hapikadon she'ena loika. Now again, Rashi said, I don't know what it's referring to, but it's a comparison. And it's saying under the same scenario where a Nazir Tamei would get Malchus, under that same scenario, by a Shavuos HaPikadon, you wouldn't get Malchus, but rather there would be a carbon of a Yeret. So Heichidami. Heichidami. No, by Shavuos HaPikadon, there would be a nosham. So Heichidami. What exactly is the case over here? Either like Eidim, if there are no Eidim, am I like it? How could you give a Nazir Malchus for being Matamim when there's no Eidim? The comparison is in the case where there are Eidim. And even when there are Eidim, by a Shavuos HaPikadon, time of Shavuos HaPikadon, Sheinu Loika, Milkud Lalaki of a carbon mice. So you have a Klararaya that even though there's Eidim that could say that your Shavuos is garnished because we have Eidim that said you have the Pikadon, you would still bring a Shavuah, you would still bring a carbon Shavuah, which is exactly not like what Rabbah said, and therefore Tiyufta, Rabbah didn't survive this onslaught. So we still don't know the answer to Rav Kahana's question. If they were Eidim and Asra by a Shavuos HaPikadon, would there be Malchus, would there be a carbon, or would there be both? So I think we did have a raya l'chal hapachos that it definitely is not Malchus by itself. It might be a carbon only, but it might be a carbon with Malchus. Zog to Gemara weiter. Rabbi Yochanan said, "Hakoifer b'mamoin sheyesh alav eidim." Someone was koifer at mammon sheyesh alav eidim. We already slugged up Rabbah, so chayiv. You're going to be chayiv because we slugged up Rabbah. It's a shvuah that will be chayiv. But the star potter. Why is the star any different? That's right. Chayav a carbon, but the star will be potter. Amar Papa, my time is Rabbi Yochanan. What is this for, Rabbi Yochanan? Zok to Gemara, because Eidim avidi demaisi. Eidim, you know why Eidim isn't such a klor raya? Therefore, my shvu has an impact. Because even if there's Eidim, who said they're going to make it the best and they might die? But star hamana. So they didn't like that pshat. Amar lei. So Huna Bareda Bishua told her Papa, I don't like your pshat. You know why? Because star nami. You can lose the star. The same way it's not the difference between a mil peh with Eidim there's no shibud kakayis. A milva b'shtar there are shibud kakayis. Hainu time of Rabbi Yochanan b'shum davishtar shibud kakayis. The ein mevin carbon al kvira shibud kakayis. We said you don't bring a carbon if the kvira is on the shibud kakayis. It's only for the kvira of moment that's not karka. Moment that's karka, you don't bring a carbon for. Beautiful. So star is shibud hakoyis, but milva al peh be'edim is not have a shibud hakoyis. Numachlois idmar mashbia ede karka. What if a mashbia ede karka? So mamish shibud hakoyis. So clearly Rabbi Yochanan is saying that there is no carbon shvuah for a shibud hakoyis, but the Gemara has a machlokes about it. Mashbia ede karkoyis pligi Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lozer. Chadam Mechayev, Chadam Potter. So Zok Gemara, it's obvious Rabbi Yochanan holds your Potter. This time Rabbi Yochanan are Potter. We just said a minute ago. We don't Rabbi Yochanan Hakoyver b'momen Yesh alav Eidim Chayiv But Star Potter because it's Shiva Kakais, and Rabbi Yochanan knows you don't bring a carbon Shua from Shiva Kakais. This time you are right. Developed. Amar lay Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Rabbi Yirmiyah asked Rabbi the following thing. Lema Rabbi Yochanan of Rabbi Lazar, the Machlekes Rabbi Yochanan we just quoted, where Rabbi Yochanan holds that Mashpiyei de Karka is Potter from a carbon Shua, and Rabbi Lazar says Chayiv. Let's say it's the same Machlekes as a Machlekes Tanoim that plucked the Rabbi Eliezer for abundant commitment. It's not to be learned. Hagozel Sodom Echavera. Someone steals a field from his friend. The Shotfa Nahar, and the river came and swallowed it up, and now there's water there. There's no more property there. What is the responsibility of the Ganiv or the Goslin to give back to the Nigzal? So Rabbi Eliezer says, Chayiv lahamid loy soda. He has to give him another soda. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. So Rashi, obviously, he holds that karka is nigzeles, because once it's nigzeles, you're mechuyev in its achrayis, like a bicycle. If I steal a bicycle and the bicycle gets stolen, I'm mechuyev to give you another bicycle. So you see, he holds that karka is nigzeles. It was never nigzeles. I never had it. It was always yours, and it's still yours. And therefore, it's your problem. We'll take it. Varminon, and the Gemara said, what is the svara of the machlekes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbanan? Rabbi Eliezer darish ribuye umeute. In the parsha of Gezela, what's considered the Gezela? Rabbi Eliezer darshans the pasuk with the method of ribuye umeute. Rabbanan darshi klali uprat. And the Rabbanan used the klal uprat method, and now the Gemara goes to the psukim to explain. Rabbi Eliezer darish ribuye umeute. It says in the parsha of Gneva, the kichesh b'misay. Let's look at the whole pasuk. It says, Nevesh tisechta umol amol b'Hashem the kichesh b'misay. That's a klal. The pikadon oibus asumas jad oiv geisel asumas jad. That's a oiv geisel. Those are all details, pratim. And then the pasuk goes on to say, oy mikoil asher yishav alav l'sheker. That's a reboot. So Zok to Gemara. It says the chichash b'misay riba the bikadon oiv asumas jad is miet oy mikoil asher yishav chazav riba. So this is a classic case of riba umiyat riba. When that happens, it's riba koil. Everything is included. The taltlin, karka, everything is included. Even shtaris, everything that has to do with theft that I could possibly steal, you're going to be chayiv the korban shvuah. My riba kol mili, but you have to be b'mayit at least one thing. The most mistaberdik thing to be b'mayit. Umamiyat miyat shtaris. Why? Because shtaris is not guvay mammon. The shtar is not money. The shtar is just a representation of money. That's not going to be included in the Parsha Trader. For Rabbanan, darshan the same psukim, but with a much more exclusive approach. For Rabbanan, darshan klali uprate as follows: the kichesh b'misay klal, the bikadnai v'asumas yada v'gezel prat, oim yikol asher yishav alav, chazav v'kalal, klal uprat klal yatadan elaka in a prat. Much more restrictive. The only thing that this Parsha of Hashem Gzelos applies to are things that are very doima to the prat. Ma prat mefurish davar metaltal. It's something mobile. Lafuka karka. The gufay mamoin in itself has value, not like a star which only represents. I've called davar metaltal the gufay mammon yotzu karkois. That automatically excludes karkois from the parsha of Hashem Gzelos of Gzela. Shein metaltal can't be moved. Yotzu avodim shehukshu karkois and yotzu shtarais alpha bisha metaltal. Even though a star is mobile, ain gufay mammon, it doesn't have intrinsic value. So now the Gemara wants to man the mechayiv, Rabbi Eliezer, who's mechayiv a korban shavua for karka, Rabbi Eliezer, we'll hold like Rabbi Eliezer, who darshant ribui miut v'ribui. Uman the potter, and in our Mishnah, Rabbi Lazar, in our Gemara, Rabbi Lazar, who says that you're, Rabbi Yochanan, who says you're going to be potter because it's karka, will hold like the Rabbanon, who darshans it B'chlal prataklal, which includes karkais and avodim as well. Amr loy lav davke man the mechayiv. If you hold your chayiv, for sure you have to hold like Rabbi Eliezer, because like Rabbanan that it's a klal prataklal, for sure karkais is not in the parsha. According to Rabbi Eliezer, karkais is in the parsha. But even Rabbi Yochanan, who holds your potter, could dash in the pasuk like Rabbi Eliezer and include stealing karka in the parsha of Hashem Gzelos. But Uman the Potter Amulach Vaha Afilu Rabbi Eliezer Moida. But when it comes to the carbon shvua, yes, it might be exela. You might pay the chaimish, but the carbon has an additional. The carbon has an additional pasuk that further restricts who it applies to. Let's look at the pasuk inside. The pasuk says, it talks about the carbon. It says, "Oy Mikael, Oy Mikael, not Oy Mikael, Asher Yishava Alav LaSheker, V'Shilam Oisei B'Roishai, V'Chamishisa Yoshis Alav, and there's a Shama Yavai." Also, I made a mistake. It's the Chaimish as well. So Zokt Rashi, Afilu Belezer Moida, Yavagav this Rabu Be'inin Hashava, Legabe Hashava, where it says the Heshiv is Exela, that's going on everything that's included in the Ribui Miyat Ribui, everything that's included being Karka as well as Avodim, that only applies to the mitzvahs Hashava, which is in that parsha. But for the mitzvah of bringing a carbon, giving an extra chaimish, that's more restricted. So the Avagav this Rabu binyan Hashava lo yisrabu le'inyan chaimish v'asham. The Chiyahader Kra, when the Torah started discussing specifically the Nakat Igid Chaimish V'Asham, the Torah adds another restrictive word. The Chsiv Oy Mikael Asher Yishav Alav L'Sheker V'Chamishisa Yosef Alav Es Hasham Yavai. It's Mikael V'Lo Yakpal. The Imit Lu Davar Sheni Daim L'Prat. And therefore we're being Memayit, an additional thing that's not Daim to the Prat. What is it being Memayit? It's being Memayit Karkais. Gewaltig. So everybody can hold like Rabbi Eliezer, but even your Rebbe will say Rabbi Eliezer just says there's a mitzvah of Hashava. It's called Gzela, if it's Karka, but not necessarily would there have the halacha of Hashem Gzela. Gewaltig. Omar Papa Mishmei Derava. Masnisen Nami Deka. It's also meduk from our Mishnah Rabbi Yochanan den Chiv carbon shvu b'karkois. If you look at our Mishnah, it's mashmal that there is no carbon shvu by karkois. Why? What was an example of a case where you do bring a carbon shvua? Is ganafta shari, v'amar leganafti, hashbiachani v'amar mein chay. Why didn't the Mishnah say a different case? V'ilu ganaftas avdi like katani. Why didn't the pick a case of ganaftas avdi? Anyway, this later case spoke about Geneva, right? Talking about an Eved that's knocking on his teeth, or someone killed my Eved. So how come we didn't stick to the case of Eved? My timer. It must be Lav Mishum the Eved Iskish like a kois. It must be that an Eved is Iskish like a kois, and he holds like a B'yochanan, Vein Mevin carbon al Kfir Shibit Karkois. A very nice riot. Omar Papi Mishmei Rava no. Ema Sefer. Let's look at the Sefer, the same Mishnah. Zakla. Kol HaMeshalem al Piatzmoi Chayiv Ve'Shein Meshalem al Piatzmoi Poter. We listed off everything. What could be missing? Zakla Lasuya Mai. My love. Lasuya Genafta Zavdi. Maybe that's what the Zakla is telling you. That Genaftas Avdi you would not Genaftas Avdi, it's forget it's saying Lasuya Genaftas Avdi. In the case of Genaftas Avdi, you would be mechuyev. You would be mechuyev a carbon shvua. So that's not like Rabbi Yochanan. That's saying ever that's hukish karkoyis, you would have a chiyuv to bring a carbon shvua. Ella mehacha lekal mashma mina. You have a dig from one case of the Mishnah to exclude avodim, but you have a dig from the last case of the Mishnah to include avodim. You can't bring a riot. So no, we do have a machlekes Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar, but you don't have a riot from our Mishnah. What halacha l'mais is? Baruch Hashem, we were zeicha to finish Daf Lamed Zayin. Be'ez Hashem. Tomorrow we're going to learn a juicy Gemara. It's Daf Lach. It's Lach. It's juicy geschmack. And we're also going to be zeicha to finish the 5th parak tomorrow and start the 6th parak.